Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, PhD, and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving women leaders, and we talk about leadership purpose and its importance for you. I am a college professor, and when I am not doing that, I am speaking, writing, coaching, mentoring, and teaching high-achieving women leaders how to find, and not only find, but how to stay in alignment with their leadership purpose so they can make a meaningful difference right there in their career, leadership, or business. Okay, let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin. And today I'm here with Dr. Jeanne Porter King. Now, let me tell you something about Dr. Jeanne. Dr. Jeanne Porter King is called to lead and make a difference in the lives of others. She is the founder and president of Porter Group, Inc., a consulting practice that focuses on leadership development, diversity and inclusion, strategic consulting and training, and process facilitation. Through Porter, Dr. Jeanne provides consulting services to Fortune 500 companies and popular consumer retail brands in a variety of industries, including media, professional and financial services, and energy. Dr. Jeanne has led corporate training programs on every continent. Wow, every continent except Antarctica. And she's committed to bringing those tools and resources to more Black women leaders and aspiring leaders. And that's why she launched the Black Women's Leadership Network, creating a community that centers the development of Black women who are existing or emerging leaders. Dr. Jeanne serves as the executive pastor at Christ Community Church along with her husband, and her unique path allows her to bring relevant faith-based messages to women in business or in the church. Welcome, Dr. Jeanne. So glad you're here.
Dr. Robin, it's so good to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation.
I'm just glad we made time in our schedules because I know you're a busy person and you selected this time to share with us. It's a joy and an honor. All right. So, we just heard a little bit from your kind of formal bio. But why don't you tell us in your own words a little bit about you and the work that you do?
Sure. I've been doing leadership development and organizational development for 30 years. I'm telling on myself. And I've done it as an in-house consultant, working in various industries. And then I launched my own company about 20 years ago. I am passionate about developing leaders as well as really developing women leaders. So my doctoral work is actually in organizational communication. And I had the secondary focus in cultural studies. So when I got out of school, I did go the academic route for probably a total of about 4 years, and then went back to consulting. But I've always had this great intersection of the culture, the organizational. So I do a lot of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, both at the strategic C-suite level, as well as leadership development of women. Love that for probably since 2012, so almost 10 years now, have specialty programs for corporate women. And my passion now is we're launching a site that's an offshoot of my company, Porter Group, of my own site, Jeanne Porter King. We're going to brand it under my name, that we will have on-demand delivery types of workshops, coaching, group coaching for women who may not have access to corporate type training with my clients. And so we're starting kind of just to grow it organically, but there will be some options for women to get coaching. I went and got a coaching certificate maybe about 3 years ago and really want to do more with women of color, especially who often aren't at the C-suite in the companies that I worked with. So I also do work in the church. As you heard, I am what some would call a bivocational minister. What I now say is my vocation or calling it has just taken me outside of the church walls. And for 20 something years, I've had the great fortune and blessing of being able to do this work in the marketplace. But for me, it really is out of a sense of call to be an ethical leader, to help others become ethical leaders, and to create these spaces of equity and inclusion for women and people of color specifically, but particularly Black women. So it's a justice issue for me also.
Yeah, it sounds like important work and timely at
Yes.
this season that we're all living through. All right, so you're doing lots of interesting things. Tell us what you enjoy about your work the most, like what really lights you up.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I think at heart, I love reading. And I often tell people if I could make a living just reading, I'd do that. But people who read a lot also often become writers or content developers. And so my passion and what lights me up is reading and synthesizing and organizing new programs and content that help people. And it might be something from a sermon series. It might be a teaching series at my church, or it might be a training program for my corporate clients. But that really is a strength of what I like to do, what I love to do, and part of, again, what I believe I'm called to do.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. Just the idea of when you were talking about reading, I was like, well, wouldn't that be wonderful? It's a job where you can just read the
Make a
entire
living
time.
reading, right?
Yeah. But it sounds like you kind of made the best of it and how to blend it. And I see that you have a current book entitled Influence Starts with I, a woman's
Yes.
guide for unleashing the power of leading from within. Tell us a little bit about that book.
Sure. I started a program about 12 years ago called Influence to Impact. And actually, a client system of mine asked me, can you train on our internal system? They had an influence skills, interpersonal influence. We hear a lot today about influencers on social media platforms, and those are people who influence large swaths of people. But really, in leadership, influence is a competency that every leader needs. It's the ability to get things done without overpowering others, not to get things done by virtue of I said so, or I have a higher rank than you, or I can fire you. And so in this very global, multicultural, multi-generational workplace, influence becomes a major skill for leaders as a whole, but particularly for women leaders who have to also battle the double binds of misogyny and racism in the case of women of color. And so this was a very popular program. My client, their program, though, ended up being dated. And I took the time to do my own research. I developed my own program, and it became one of my most popular programs. And as a result of it, as it evolves, most of us that are in content creation, you want your programs to stay lively and current. So I was every 2 years tweaking and adding to it. And one iteration of it, it occurred to me as I talked to women in these workshops, and either with my corporate clients or with a group that I do training for, the Institute for Management Studies. I'm one of their faculty. So they're a member organization of other corporations. So I might speak before 90, 100 women in workshops, not audiences of speaking, but we're doing workshops. And it occurred to me the more I worked with the women that the first principle I had to teach them was that influence started with I. It started with your mindset. It started with how you saw yourself. It started with literally how you define that I within. And out of that program came the book that I therefore focused on, Influence Mindset. I start with knowing your leadership purpose, because again, influence and leadership goes hand in hand. They go hand in hand. But I was finding that some of the confidence issues that we talk about, a confidence gap, I began to argue that I'm not so sure there's a gendered confidence gap, though there are researchers who argue that. I said what often happens is women's confidence levels are measured up and against men's confidence levels, and they look different. Men, not all men, so we don't want to stereotype, but many men, not all, demonstrate confidence in far more bodacious, verbal ways, bravado. And many women, again, not all, but many women can be confident, and they come to my workshops and tell me, they say, Dr. Jeanne, I'm not a shy person, but I am quieter and I am more introverted. So I listen, but I am confident. But because I don't talk as much, many of my colleagues feel that I'm not confident and they try to coach me on it. And that was a good insight for me to remind people that because someone's quieter doesn't mean they're not confident. So I began to teach that it's not about women trying to replicate men's confidence levels for those that took that gap. The real confidence gap we need to be mindful of is the gap between where you currently are and where you could be. Because there could be some internal things that are keeping you from going through doors that are open for you, from speaking up in opportunities that your voice needs to be heard. That's the gap that I begin to address. And that's in the book because it's the whole notion, again, influence starts with I, how you see power, how you see confidence, your mindset, how you build a collaborative network, all starts with this internal gauge of your mindset, your worldview, and how you see yourself.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And it's a theme that's reoccurring. In the last, I would say, maybe 3 podcast guests who I spoke with, each had some version of what you're saying today. I like the way you're expressing it. Influence starts with I. Mm-hmm. I think the one before talked about this internal coming from within. No, It comes from within. And so it sounds like it's an important message that is trying to come out because, like I say, I didn't know that you and the other guests had this thinking about, coming from within before I invited you to the podcast. So it speaks to me to a need that's there.
I think the need is we have for so long and more recently lived in such an external facing. Social media has allowed people to put their best stories on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And we live these perfect lives, and we often are striving to be like someone else. And we see that image out there. And we've always had, American Idol is a name, but really we've always had idols that we've looked up to. And that can be a very shallow existence if you're trying to strive to be like someone else or even replicate their life, but you don't have that mooring and that anchor and that center inside yourself. And so the work I've always done, because I've had this intersection between the ministry and the calling of God on my life, but allowed to do it in a corporate or business setting, I've always tried to help develop leaders from the inside out. And a lot of coaches use that phrase. That became a calling card for most coaching, because that's what coaches are trying to do, is really draw from the strength within you to be able to do what you do. And I argue that you lead from who you are. And if you don't know who you are, then you're going to lead like anybody else. But when you can come to know who you really are, and of course, our faith says when you know whose you are, then that brings out those distinctives that really shape your leadership. Character of leadership comes from those internal values and identity and decisions and choices that leaders make about the workplace, about finances, about, priorities. Those all come out of a sense of who you are and then who we collectively become to be to make the corporate culture, if you will. So I see there's a big need these days to bring people back from faking it, putting anything out there, putting on the mask, pretending to be something you're not. And this idea of now being vulnerable, being authentic, being real. And if you can't take me as I am, then maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Let's find the place where I can be planted and can bloom right there, but bloom authentically.
Yes, bloom authentically. Be who you are. And this is connected to, you have a chapter in your book about leadership purpose, which I love, of course, because it's the name of this podcast, Leadership Purpose. So tell me what your understanding of leadership purpose is.
Sure. For me, I always say that leadership purpose is nothing more than a purpose for leaders. So a leadership purpose statement is a purpose statement for leaders. And what I mean by that, because I came to the work of leadership development first through, again, ministry, through my own spiritual formation, I read almost everything that Miles Monroe wrote. And he, if you remember, is, the Bahamian minister, prolific writer who nailed into us the importance of purpose, knowing why God placed you here on this earth. He said the grave was filled with too many unfinished books, too many unfinished songs, et cetera, et cetera. Rick Warren came along later talking about the purpose-driven life, but it was Miles Monroe that formed a lot of us. And so because I've always then been intent on, some say discovering my purpose, some say recovering the purpose, some say recognizing your purpose, but being in touch with a distinct reason of why I'm here. And then having gravitated into this arena of developing leaders. I did a leadership dissertation. I felt this calling. I was a young adult leader in our statewide ministry organization back in Ohio, where I grew up. And so I cut my teeth on leadership, one of the few women. So I was in this male field and the first woman in 40 years to lead this state organization. But even before then, seeing these very powerful men and women, primarily men, lead these ministries. And it just resonated within me. I think that we get cues about our purpose by paying attention to what happens inside of us when things resonate with us, when causes catch our attention or passions, ignite within us. Some say you recognize it from the pain that you've come through, and I get that. For me, it was really this vision that's like, whoa, it was, I can't even explain it. And people, this is going to sound funny. I had, men in that arena, that were single later. If we tried to date or something, they'd say, I never really even saw you as a woman because you were competing up there like the rest of us. These were these conservative, churches that I'm thinking, you didn't see me as a woman. Then what did you see me as, right? But what they were saying was their worldview of women at that time was the auxiliary person. It was the attachment, the one they marry. I wasn't the marrying type. I was the competitor, right? And so, I remember one telling me that because I so early gravitated into assuming those roles when asked, stepping it up and then building these marvelous teams and organizations to get the work done and ultimately gravitating to the top spot. And, people were sometimes amazed that a woman was doing that 30 years ago, right? So long story short, I was cultivated in a culture that had strong leadership. And I was raised by a father, my mother and father. I'm the eldest. My father told me I could be whatever I wanted to be. And I didn't have any hindrances in my head that told me I couldn't be the leader. As a matter of fact, my first 2 degrees are in engineering. So I was educated in a male-dominated field and my first jobs were there. He placed that within me. And so when it came then to understanding leadership, I didn't have this baggage that said women couldn't be leaders. And I started developing these models that helped me understand how we, though, had to lead and what the barriers were. Because even though I was told that didn't mean I didn't meet resistance out there, right? And so again, I'm taking a long time to explain this. So for me, purpose came into, I believe I was called to help develop and cultivate leaders. As I was out there, I recognized that many leaders weren't clear on their purpose of being where they were, right? And so I felt this pull, this call, this percolation that led me through all of these different leadership experiences. And for me, that resonated and confirmed my purpose, right? And what I needed to begin to do was help, especially the women in the corporations that I worked with, coached, and trained to recognize that you have a purpose for leading where you are. And it's not just a tactical purpose of getting this job done or fulfilling this role. And as you heard me say on an earlier program we were on together, I'd have women come to me and their goal was to get their boss's job. That was their next step up the ladder. And I'd say, is that all you want? And they'd look at me a little differently. And then we'd walk through this notion of leadership purpose, how that it's a higher order purpose. It's an umbrella that connects so many different parts of your life. that how you lead at work really shouldn't be that different than how you lead in the neighborhood, at church, or at home, right? Yeah, we can flex our styles, but the core values and this calling of what you'll do as a leader to ignite something in someone else, to help other people overcome something, that should be a theme that's kind of like this overarching umbrella so that you carry that with you. The context change, and yeah, you adapt your style. You learn how to both be strategic and relational, but your core purpose for helping others stays pretty constant. And when you get in touch with that, then you understand that when the hardships come in the workplace, but I'm here for a reason. This is the purpose I'm here for. Or when the job is downsized, when there's a major change as we had last year in 2020, you recognize the purpose is constant. It may evolve and even expand, but you don't fall apart because your identity is not anchored to the position, but you're anchored to a purpose that continues to go with you. And you can recreate some things in a different context when you know your purpose.
Yes, yes. And you are clearly expressing you're passionate about it. And I love this. I could talk to you all day about this topic because, of course, it's one of my favorite topics to talk about leadership purpose and to hear the way you talk about it. But now that we're coming to the end of our time, I'm sure people want to continue to hear what you have to say about it, because between having this conversation with you now and your book, there's so much more that we can learn. Let's say, what's some parting words you'd like to leave with people, and then we'll let them know how they can stay in touch with you.
And I would love for people who listen to your podcast, definitely follow me. And I know you'll give the contact information. And we're rebranding JeannePorterKing.com. But we have as the tagline, inspiring the leader within every woman. Because I believe there is a leader in each of us, that there's a dimension of leadership in almost anything we do. And too many women shy back or shirk back from the title. In my early research 30 years ago, there were women out in the community doing marvelous things, but they wouldn't use the word leader. It sounded too male or sounded too negative. So they were coordinators, they were facilitators. And the reality is there's a leader in each of us. And my goal and my passion is to help introduce that leader within every woman to every woman. We'll have a series of products and resources that will help unlock some of these gifts within people. So I would love to hear from them again, but I would love for the women, especially listening to your podcast, to know that there are opportunities that, doors that open for them. And sometimes they fail to go through them because they don't see that leader that is bursting to try to get out. Just as a quick closing for you, on the cover of my book, as you see, is a chess piece, a pair of chess pieces. You have the pawn there, which, as you know, is the weakest chess piece on the chessboard, but it's the queen coming up out of the pawn. And the queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard. And some will argue the king is, because if you capture the king, the game is over. But the reality is the queen can move in any direction and has the highest point value. And so what I've recognized is there's too many women who have felt like they've been pawns in their corporations, their businesses, their churches, their schools, their educational places, that they've helped a lot of people succeed, but they've been pawns. And now I want them to take some time to cultivate that leader, that queen that is within them, that's ready to come on up and move in a strategic direction. We've been told women have got to use their power. We know that. The time now was for women like that queen to use our power strategically. And a lot of that is going to happen by coming to know who you are, know your leadership purpose, build your confidence, know that influence starts with I, and build your network, collaborate. We don't have to do this as lone rangers, but there is a leader within. That queen is trying to come up and out, and you don't have to be a pawn to anyone anymore.
Dr. King, what else can I say after this? Nothing. That's it. Okay, tell us again where people can contact you, your website and your social.
Sure. So JeannePorterKing.com, and I do spell my name Jeanne, Porter, Porter, King, King. So that would be the best place. It will be rebranded. So we have a new look in about a month. We also have launched the Black Women's Leadership Network, and there is a website for that, blackwomensleadershipnetwork.com. And there's a free download for you if you want to know more about how Black women lead. And you can find me on Twitter at Jeanne P. King, at Jeanne P. King, on Instagram, Dr. Jeanne Porter King, and on Facebook and on LinkedIn. So all of those places, I'd love to have you connect with me on whatever your favorite social media platform is. And we're going to have more programming on each of them. So Dr. Robin, thank you so much for having me on your program.
It's been a joy and an honor, and just the treasures of wisdom just flowing from you. I appreciate. Okay, everybody. And I'm Dr. Robin. You can reach me at robinlowens.com. And I am on LinkedIn. And this is the end of our episode. Until next time. Bye, everybody. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Robin signing off. See you next time.